My family blocked me for 10 years. Then I won the lottery. At our reunion dinner, my brother handed me a drink with a smile. The waitress accidentally bumped the table and swapped our glasses. I saw the blue powder in his drink. I stood up, took the waitress's hand, and told them something that made them froze. I'm glad to have you here. Follow this story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The phone rang at exactly 7:32 on a Tuesday morning, cutting through the silence of my small apartment like a blade through paper. I stared at the unknown number flashing on my screen, coffee mug halfway to my lips, steam still rising from the black liquid that had become my only companion these past 10 years. I almost didn't answer. After a decade of silence from my family, unexpected calls usually meant bad news or bill collectors, but something about the persistence of the ring, the way it seemed to demand attention rather than simply request it, made me reach for the phone. Philip speaking. Phil, it's Alan. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, hitting the linoleum floor with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through my entire body. Alan, my brother. The same voice that had told me 10 years ago that I was no longer welcome at family gatherings, that I was a disappointment, that maybe it was better if I just stayed away. Alan, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, it's me. His voice sounded different somehow. Softer. Almost. Humble. I know this is unexpected. I know we haven't talked since you told me I was dead to the family. I finished for him, memories flooding back like a dam had burst in my mind. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end, the same slightly labored breathing he'd had since childhood asthma. Some things never change, I thought bitterly. Phil, I've been thinking a lot lately. About what happened. About how things ended between us. His voice cracked slightly. I was wrong. We were all wrong. And I miss my brother. I sank into my worn armchair, the same one I'd bought from a thrift store when I'd first moved into this $800 a month apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Everything in this small space was mine, earned through my own sweat and determination after my family had cast me out like a piece of unwanted furniture. What do you want, Alan? I asked, though my voice had lost some of its edge. I want to see you. I want to talk, face to face. He paused again. I know you probably think I'm crazy for calling after all this time, but I heard about your good fortune. My blood went cold, of course that's what this was about. 3 months ago, I'd won $57 million in the state lottery. I'd been careful, discreet, but news like that has a way of traveling, especially to family members who suddenly remember your existence. My good fortune, I repeated slowly. The lottery, Phil. Congratulations. I mean that sincerely. His voice took on that tone I remembered from childhood, the one he used when he wanted something but was trying to sound casual about it. But that's not why I'm calling. Well, not entirely. It made me realize how much time we've wasted, how much I've lost by being too proud to reach out. I stood up and walked to my small kitchen window, looking out at the busy street below. People hurried past on their way to work, to lives that mattered, to families who actually wanted them around. I'd watched this same view for 10 years and it had never felt as lonely as it did in this moment. You cut me out of your life, I said quietly. You, Veronica, everyone. When Dad died and left me that $20,000 inheritance instead of you, you all acted like I'd stolen it from you, like I'd somehow manipulated a dying man. I know. God, Phil, I know. And I hate myself for it. We all do. His voice was thick with what sounded like genuine emotion. Veronica, especially. She's been after me for years to call you, to make things right. Veronica, my sister-in-law who had once accused me of being a selfish parasite who only cared about money. The woman who had convinced the rest of the family that I was somehow responsible for Alan's financial problems, even though I'd been struggling to make ends meet myself back then. She wants to make things right? I asked, unable to keep the skepticism out of my voice. She does. We both do. Phil, we've had 10 years to think about what we lost. What we threw away because of pride and stupidity. Alan's voice grew more urgent. I don't care about money anymore. I don't care about inheritances or who got what. I just want my brother back. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 10 years of loneliness pressing down on me like a physical thing. 10 years of birthdays spent alone. 10 years of holidays with just me and whatever takeout restaurant was open. 10 years of accomplishments with no one to share them with, and failures with no one to comfort me through them. I don't know, Alan, I said finally. I don't know if I can trust this. I understand, I do, but will you at least consider it? Will you meet with me? Just once? He paused. There's this restaurant, Belmont's downtown, remember? We used to go there with Dad when we were kids. The place with the red leather booths and the old piano player. I remembered. I remembered being 8 years old, sitting in those red booths, sharing a piece of chocolate cake with Alan while Dad told us stories about his own childhood. Back when we were brothers, back when family meant something. Thursday night, Alan continued. 7 o'clock. If you come, we'll talk. If you don't, well, at least I'll know I tried. I found myself nodding even though he couldn't see me. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. Relief flooded his voice. Phil, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm hoping you'll give me the chance to earn it. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment for hours, staring at the phone in my hands. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, but inside my small space, time seemed suspended. I thought about that little boy who used to look up to his older brother, who used to believe that family was forever. I thought about the man I'd become, successful in my own quiet way, financially secure for the first time in my life, but still carrying the wound of rejection that had never quite healed. I thought about the way Alan's voice had sounded. Different. Older, maybe. Sadder. Could people really change? Could 10 years of separation make someone realize what they'd lost? By Wednesday evening, I'd made up my mind. I would go to Belmont's. I would sit in one of those red leather booths and listen to what Alan had to say. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe I was setting myself up for another heartbreak. But the alternative was spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. I chose my clothes carefully. Nothing too expensive that might remind him of the lottery money, but nothing too shabby either. A simple navy shirt, dark jeans, my old leather jacket that I'd had since before our falling out. I wanted to look like the brother he remembered, not the wealthy stranger I'd become. As I walked toward Belmont's on Thursday evening, my heart hammered against my ribs with a rhythm I hadn't felt since I was a teenager asking someone to prom. The restaurant's warm glow spilled onto the sidewalk, and I could hear the faint sound of piano music drifting through the windows. Some things, at least, remained the same. I paused at the entrance, my hand on the brass handle that had been polished smooth by thousands of hands over the decades. This was it. This was the moment that would either begin healing a 10-year wound or tear it open all over again. But as I stood there, something cold settled in my stomach. A feeling I couldn't quite name, like the moment before a storm when the air becomes heavy and electric. I told myself it was just nerves, just the natural anxiety of seeing family after so long. Still, the feeling lingered as I pulled open the door and stepped inside. The hostess smiled warmly and led me through the familiar maze of tables toward the back corner where Alan had said he'd be waiting. And there he was, sitting in our old booth, looking older and grayer than I remembered, but unmistakably my brother. He stood when he saw me approaching, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then he stepped forward, arms outstretched, and embraced me like no time had passed at all. But even as I hugged him back, even as I felt the strange comfort of family connection after so many years, that cold feeling in my stomach grew stronger. You look good, Phil. Really good. Alan's smile seemed genuine as we settled into the booth, but there was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite read. A flickering quality, like a candle flame in a draft. You too, I lied. The truth was, Alan looked tired. More than tired. He looked like a man carrying a weight that was slowly crushing him. His expensive suit couldn't hide the slight tremor in his hands or the way his eyes kept darting around the restaurant, as if he were expecting someone. "Veronica sends her love," he said, signaling the waitress. "She wanted to come tonight, but I thought it might be better if it was just us first. You know how it is." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I did know how it was. The Veronica I remembered wouldn't have missed an opportunity to control a conversation, especially one involving money. Her absence felt deliberate, calculated. The waitress approached our table, a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and kind eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing this job for a while, but there was something else about her that caught my attention. The way she glanced between Alan and me, as if she were studying us. "Good evening, gentlemen. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Her voice was warm, professional. "We'll have a bottle of your best red wine," Alan said without hesitation. "Something special, we're celebrating." I raised an eyebrow. "We are?" "A reunion," Alan said, that flickering smile returning. "Brothers finding their way back to each other. If that's not worth celebrating, I don't know what is." The waitress, her name tag read Sarah, nodded and disappeared toward the bar. I watched her go, noting how she moved with purpose but kept glancing back toward our table. Probably just good customer service, I told myself. "So," Alan said, leaning back against the red leather, "tell me everything. How have you been? Really been?" I considered the question. How had I been? Lonely. Successful in small ways. Careful with my money even after the lottery win. Building a life that was mine, even if it was a life lived largely in solitude. "I've been okay," I said finally. "Working. Living quietly. You know me." "I do know you." Alan's voice took on that tone again, the one that made my shoulders tense without me understanding why. Always the humble one. Always content with less. "Is that a bad thing?" No, of course not." He held up his hands. "It's admirable, actually. Very. You." Sarah returned with the wine, a bottle that looked expensive enough to cost more than my monthly rent. She presented the label to Alan, who waved her off impatiently. "Just pour it. We trust your judgment." As she opened the bottle, I found myself watching her hands. Steady, careful, professional. But when she looked up and caught my eye, there was something there. A wariness that matched the feeling in my own chest. "How's business?" I asked Alan, as Sarah poured the wine into 2 crystal glasses. "Good. Really good, actually." But the way he said it, the slight tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. "The construction company is doing well. Lots of new developments going up around the city." I knew enough about Alan's business to know that the construction industry had been struggling lately. Rising costs, labor shortages, supply chain issues. But I didn't press. This dinner was supposed to be about reconciliation, not interrogation. Sarah finished pouring and set the bottle on the table. "Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes?" "A few more minutes," Alan said, his attention already back on me. "Thank you." She nodded and stepped away, but I noticed she didn't go far. She busied herself with cleaning a nearby table, well within earshot of our conversation. "So," Alan continued, lifting his wine glass, $57 million. That must feel incredible. And there it was, the elephant in the room, finally acknowledged. I picked up my own glass but didn't drink. "It's surreal," I said honestly. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and it'll all be a dream." "What are you going to do with it? I mean, that kind of money. The possibilities are endless." "I haven't really decided. Maybe travel. Maybe buy a bigger place." I shrugged. "Honestly, I'm still getting used to the idea." "You always were careful with money." Alan's laugh sounded forced. "Remember when we were kids and you'd save every penny of your allowance while I spent mine the day I got it?" I remembered. I also remembered how Alan used to borrow my saved money and rarely pay it back. Our parents had called it sharing. I'd called it theft, though I'd been too young to articulate it that way. "Some habits die hard," I said. "That's good, though. Smart." Money can disappear faster than you think if you're not careful. His grip tightened on his wine glass. Trust me on that. There was something in his voice, a bitterness that made me look at him more closely. The expensive suit, I realized, was slightly wrinkled. His watch, which I'd assumed was new, had a small scratch on the face. The signs were subtle, but they were there. "Alan, are you okay? Financially, I mean?" His face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, defensiveness, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like relief. "Why would you ask that?" "Just a feeling." He was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass. When he looked up at me again, his eyes were bright with what might have been tears. "Things have been challenging. The business took some hits during the pandemic. We overextended on a couple of projects." He took a shaky breath. "I didn't want to burden you with this, that's not why I called." But even as he said it, I could see that it was exactly why he'd called. The timing was too perfect. A brother he hadn't spoken to in 10 years suddenly reaching out just months after that brother became wealthy beyond imagination. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Bad enough?" He managed a weak smile. "But we're working through it. Veronica's been amazing, really. Cutting back, finding ways to save money, we'll figure it out." Sarah appeared beside our table again, this time with a basket of bread and a small plate of olive oil. "Have you decided what you'd like to order?" she asked. "Actually," Alan said, "could you give us just a few more minutes? We're having an important conversation." "Of course." But as she turned to leave, she caught my eye again, and this time the wariness was unmistakable. More than wariness. It was almost like a warning. "Phil," Alan continued once she was gone, "I need you to know something. This dinner, this conversation, it's not about money. It's not about the lottery. It's about us, about family." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But every instinct I'd developed during 10 years of solitude was screaming that something was wrong. "I know you probably think I'm here because of the money," Alan continued. "And I understand why you'd think that. Our history isn't great when it comes to financial issues. No, it's not. But I've learned from that. We all have. Money isn't everything, Phil. Family is everything." He leaned forward, his intensity palpable. "Do you know what it's been like these past 10 years not having my brother in my life? Not being able to call you when Dad had his heart attack? Not being able to share the good times or ask for advice during the bad ones?" His words hit me harder than I'd expected, because the truth was I did know. I knew exactly what it had been like because I'd lived it too. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone, all of them marked by the absence of family. "I've missed you," I said quietly. More than I wanted to admit. "Then let's not waste any more time." Alan lifted his wine glass again. "To second chances, to family, to the future." He waited for me to lift my glass. The wine caught the light from the overhead fixture, deep red and rich. Around us, the restaurant hummed with quiet conversation and the gentle notes of the piano player in the corner, the same elderly man who'd been playing here since we were children. But as I reached for my glass, I caught sight of Sarah again. She was at the bar now, but her attention was fixed on our table, and the expression on her face wasn't just wary anymore, it was alarmed. She took a step toward us, then stopped, as if fighting an internal battle. Her eyes met mine across the dining room, and in that moment I saw something that made my blood run cold. The wine glass felt heavier in my hand than it should have. Alan held his own glass up, waiting for me to complete the toast. His smile stretched tight across his face like a mask that didn't quite fit. The candlelight flickered between us, casting dancing shadows that made everything feel surreal, like I was watching this scene from outside my own body. "To second chances," I repeated slowly, lifting my glass. But as I brought it toward my lips, something made me pause. Maybe it was the way Alan's eyes never left my face, watching my every movement with an intensity that felt predatory. Maybe it was the slight tremor in his hand that he was trying so hard to hide. Or maybe it was Sarah, the waitress, who had moved closer to our table and was now standing just a few feet away, her face pale with something that looked like desperation. "Actually," I said, setting my glass back down, "I think I should use the restroom first. All that coffee this morning, you know?" Alan's face flickered with something. Disappointment? Frustration? But he quickly covered it with another one of those forced smiles. "Of course. Take your time." As I stood up, I caught Sarah's eye. She gave me the smallest nod, so subtle I almost missed it. But in that nod, I saw confirmation of something I'd been feeling since the moment I walked into this restaurant. I was in danger. The restroom was small and dimly lit, with old-fashioned fixtures that belonged to another era. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the spotted mirror. What was I doing here? What had I expected from this reunion? That Alan would magically be the brother I remembered from childhood? That 10 years of silence and resentment would disappear over dinner and wine? I dried my hands with a paper towel, trying to organize my thoughts. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the isolation of the past decade had made me suspicious of everyone, even family. Maybe Alan really had changed, really did want to reconcile. But as I reached for the door handle, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Quick, urgent footsteps that stopped right outside the restroom door. "Sir?" It was Sarah's voice, barely above a whisper. "Sir, please, I need to tell you something." I opened the door carefully. The hallway was empty except for Sarah, who looked around nervously before stepping closer. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I had to warn you." Her words came out in a rush. "I saw something, at your table, when you went to the restroom." My stomach dropped. "What did you see?" "Your brother, he put something in your drink. A small packet, blue powder. He was very careful, very quick, but I saw it." Her hands were shaking. "I've been working here for 3 years, and I've never seen anything like it." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. "Are you sure?" "Completely sure. I was watching because something felt off about him all evening. The way he kept checking his phone, the way he insisted on ordering specific wine, the way he kept looking toward the entrance like he was expecting someone." She took a shaky breath. "Sir, I don't think you should go back to that table." But even as she said it, I knew I had to. I had to see this through, had to understand what my own brother was planning to do to me. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Thank you for telling me." "What are you going to do?" I thought for a moment. "I'm going back to the table, but I need you to do something for me." Sarah nodded eagerly. "When I get back, I'm going to ask for fresh glasses. I'm going to say something about mine having a spot on it. Can you help me with that?" "Of course. But sir, maybe you should just leave. Call the police." "Not yet. I need to understand why. I need to know what's really happening here." I walked back to the table on unsteady legs, my mind racing. Alan looked up as I approached, that same forced smile plastered on his face. "Feel better?" he asked. "Much, thanks." I sat down and looked at my wine glass, still sitting exactly where I'd left it. To anyone else, it would look perfectly normal. Crystal clear, deep red wine. Nothing unusual about it at all. "Actually, could we get fresh glasses? This one has a spot on it." Alan's face went through a series of micro-expressions, surprise, confusion, then something darker. "A spot? I don't see anything." "Just here, on the rim." I pointed to an imaginary mark. I'm probably being too picky, but you know how I am. Sarah appeared at our table as if summoned. "Is everything all right, gentlemen? Could we get fresh glasses, please?" I asked. "This one seems to have a spot." "Of course." She gathered both glasses quickly and efficiently. "I'll be right back with clean ones." As she walked away, Alan watched her go with an expression I couldn't quite read. When he turned back to me, his smile was gone. "You always were particular about things like that," he said. But his voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Some habits die hard," I replied, echoing his words from earlier. Sarah returned with fresh glasses and poured new wine from the bottle. As she worked, I noticed she was being extremely careful, making sure each glass was filled from the same source, eliminating any possibility of contamination. "There you go," she said, setting the glasses down. "Fresh and clean." "Thank you," I said, catching her eye. "You've been wonderful tonight." She gave me another subtle nod and stepped away. Alan picked up his new glass immediately. "Now, where were we? Oh yes, our toast." But as he lifted the glass toward his lips, I noticed something that made my heart race. His hand was shaking more noticeably now, and there was sweat beading on his forehead despite the restaurant's comfortable temperature. "Alan," I said carefully, "are you feeling all right? You look a little pale." "I'm fine," he said quickly. "Just excited about our reunion, it's been so long." But he wasn't fine. As I watched him, I could see the signs of someone under enormous stress. The way his eyes kept darting around the restaurant, the way he kept checking his phone, the way his free hand was clenched into a fist on the table. "Tell me about Veronica," I said suddenly. "How is she really doing?" She's good. Great, actually." But the way he said it suggested otherwise. "She's been working hard, supporting the business. She's amazing, really." "Is she here tonight, in the restaurant, I mean?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "Here? No, of course not. Why would you ask that?" "Just wondering. You keep checking your phone like you're expecting a call." Alan set his phone face down on the table with more force than necessary. "I'm not expecting anything. I'm here with my brother, focusing on our conversation." But even as he said it, the phone buzzed with a text message. Alan glanced at it quickly, then back at me, his face now openly troubled. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine, everything's fine." He lifted his wine glass again. "Come on, Phil, let's have that toast, to family, to the future." This time, I lifted my glass as well. But as we brought them together in the traditional clink of crystal against crystal, something happened that changed everything. Sarah appeared beside our table again, this time carrying a tray with what looked like a complimentary appetizer. But as she approached, she seemed to stumble slightly, bumping into the table just as our glasses met. In the confusion of the moment, our glasses jostled together, wine sloshing between them. Sarah steadied herself quickly, apologizing profusely, but in those few seconds of chaos something had happened. Our glasses had somehow switched positions. "I'm so sorry," Sarah said, her voice filled with genuine distress. "How clumsy of me. Let me get you fresh drinks." "No need," Alan said quickly, too quickly. "No harm done." But his eyes were fixed on the glasses, and I could see him trying to figure out which was which. In the dim candlelight with the identical crystal and identical wine, it would be impossible to tell them apart. "Actually," I said, reaching for the glass closest to me, "I think we're fine. Right, Alan?" He nodded slowly, his face pale now, sweat more visible on his forehead. "Right, we're fine." I lifted my glass, or what I thought was my glass, toward my lips, watching Alan over the rim. He was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not the loving brother from our childhood. Not even the angry, resentful man who had cut me out of his life 10 years ago. This was the face of someone desperate, someone dangerous, someone who had been caught in an act so terrible that there was no going back. "To family," I said, and took a sip. Alan lifted his own glass with trembling hands. As the wine touched his lips, I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just desperation anymore. The wine had barely touched Alan's lips when I saw the change in his expression. What started as forced confidence crumbled into something raw and terrified. He set his glass down with shaking hands, his face now ashen under the restaurant's warm lighting. "You know," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "You know what just happened, don't you?" Alan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Phil, I don't understand what you're talking about." But his eyes told a different story. They darted between the wine glasses, between my face and Sarah's retreating figure, between his phone and the exit. He was calculating, trying to figure out his next move, but the panic was winning. The blue powder, I said simply. The words hit him like a physical blow. He actually recoiled, pressing back against the red leather booth as if he could disappear into it. How did you? He stopped himself, but it was too late. How did I know? I leaned forward, keeping my voice low enough that the other diners couldn't hear. Because someone was watching, someone who cared enough about a stranger to risk her job to warn me. Alan's gaze snapped toward the bar where Sarah was standing, her face pale but determined. That little, don't. The word came out sharper than I intended. Don't you dare blame her for doing the right thing. The only person to blame here is you. The silence stretched between us, filled with the gentle piano music and the soft murmur of other conversations. Normal people having normal dinners, unaware that at the corner table one brother had just tried to. What? The reality of what had almost happened was too enormous to fully process. Why? I asked finally. Just tell me why. Alan closed his eyes, and when he opened them again there were tears. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Phil. The debts, the creditors calling day and night. Veronica. She's been so patient, but I can see it in her eyes. The disappointment, the fear that we're going to lose everything. So you thought the solution was to hurt me? I thought. He rubbed his face with both hands. I wasn't thinking clearly. When I heard about the lottery, it felt like a sign. Like maybe there was a way out of this mess. By eliminating me. By becoming your heir. The words came out in a whisper. I had this whole plan. You'd have an accident, a heart attack, something sudden but natural looking. And since you don't have a will as your only living relative, I'd inherit everything. It seemed logical. The casual way he said it, as if we were discussing the weather, made my stomach turn. Logical? You were going to murder me and you call it logical. It wasn't supposed to be like this. His voice rose, then dropped again as he remembered where we were. I never wanted it to be personal. I love you, Phil. You're my brother. No. I shook my head slowly. A brother doesn't do what you just tried to do. A brother doesn't plan something like this for months and then look you in the eye and pretend it's about reconciliation. Alan wiped his nose with his napkin, leaving behind a smear of tears and snot. Months? What are you talking about? I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. Alan's eyes widened as I set it on the table between us. I hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago, I said. The day after you called me. You what? I'm not stupid, Alan. A brother who hasn't spoken to me in 10 years suddenly wants to reconcile right after I win the lottery? I knew something was wrong. I pressed play on the recorder. Alan's voice filled the small space between us, tinny but clear. The restaurant is perfect. Lots of ambient noise, dim lighting. If something happens to him there, it'll just look like a heart attack or stroke. Stress of the reunion, you know. Veronica's voice responded. And you're sure this will work? The stuff Marcus got for us? He said it's foolproof. Tasteless, odorless, looks natural. Phil drinks it, has what looks like a medical emergency, and we're free and clear. Rich and free and clear. I stopped the recording. Alan was staring at the device like it was a venomous snake. Marcus? I asked. Who's Marcus? Alan's face somehow managed to go even paler. How long have you been recording us? Long enough to know that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. Long enough to know that Veronica is not only aware of your plan but actively helping. Long enough to know that you've been planning my death since the week after the lottery numbers were announced. Phil, please, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. You and your wife decided that $57 million was worth more than my life. I picked up the recorder and slipped it back into my pocket. The question now is what I'm going to do about it. Alan leaned forward desperately. We can work this out. We're family. We can figure out a solution that works for everyone. A solution? I almost laughed. You just tried to kill me, Alan. In what universe is there a solution to that? The money, I'll pay you back. Whatever you want, I'll give you. With what? You just told me you're broke. He was spiraling now, grasping at anything that might save him. The business, I'll sign over the business. You can have everything. I don't want your failing construction company. I don't want anything from you except an explanation. Help me understand how the brother who used to share his Halloween candy with me turned into someone who could plan my murder." Alan was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands folded on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "It started small, a few bad investments, some contracts that went sideways. I thought I could fix it, you know. I thought if I just worked harder, made better deals, everything would be okay." He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. But it kept getting worse. The hole kept getting deeper. And then Veronica started talking about what would happen if we lost everything. The house, the business, our reputation. She said people would never respect us again. "So you decided to kill me." It wasn't supposed to feel like killing. It was supposed to be cleaner than that. More like a business transaction. The words hung in the air between us like poison gas. I felt sick, not just from what he'd tried to do, but from the realization that this person sitting across from me wasn't my brother anymore. Maybe he never had been. Maybe the Alan I remembered from childhood was just a story I'd told myself to make sense of a relationship that had always been one-sided. "There's something else you should know," I said quietly. "Something the private investigator discovered." Alan's face went white. "What?" "Marcus, your supplier. He's an undercover police officer." The glass slipped from Alan's hand, hitting the table with a sharp crack that drew stares from nearby diners. Wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood. "That's impossible. The entire operation has been under surveillance for months. They've been building a case against a network of people who've been providing substances to desperate individuals. You're not their first customer, Alan. You're just the one who's going to help them close the net." I could see his mind working, trying to process this new information, but the stuff he gave us was harmless. Probably just crushed vitamins or sugar. They wanted to see how far you'd go, what you'd actually do when the moment came. I leaned back against the booth, suddenly feeling exhausted. "Congratulations, you passed their test." Alan put his head in his hands. Around us, the restaurant continued its peaceful evening rhythm, unaware that at table 12, a man's entire world was collapsing. "What happens now?" he asked without looking up. "Now? Now you have a choice." I signaled Sarah, who approached our table cautiously. "I'd like the check, please." "Of course," she said, but she was looking at Alan with concern. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I told her. "Thank you for everything tonight. You probably saved my life." She nodded once and disappeared toward the front of the restaurant. Alan finally looked up. "What choice?" "You can turn yourself in, cooperate with the police, help them build their case against the network. Maybe you'll get a reduced sentence for cooperation. Or I call Detective Morrison right now and you try to run. But I should mention that there are 2 officers in the parking lot who've been watching this restaurant all evening, and 1 more at the back exit." I pulled out my phone. "Your choice, Alan, but either way, this ends tonight." His shoulders sagged as the fight went out of him completely. "Will you visit me? In prison?" I considered the question seriously. "I don't know. Maybe someday. When I figured out how to forgive you for being willing to watch me die." I wouldn't have watched. I would have left before. "Don't." I stood up, dropping cash on the table to cover the bill. "Just don't. You've said enough." As I turned to leave, Alan called my name one last time. "Phil, I really did miss you." That part wasn't a lie. I stopped but didn't turn around. The sad thing is, I believe you. But missing someone and loving someone are 2 different things. If you'd loved me, none of this would have happened. I walked out of Belmont's without looking back, leaving Alan sitting alone in the red leather booth where we'd shared so many childhood memories. As I stepped into the cool night air, I saw Sarah waiting by the front door. "Thank you," I said simply. "I'm just glad you're okay." She hesitated. "What will happen to him?" "He'll face the consequences of his choices. We all do, eventually." She nodded, then surprised me by extending her hand. "I'm Sarah, by the way. Sarah Chen." "Philip Hayes," I said, shaking her hand. "And I owe you a debt I can never repay. Buy me coffee sometime." she said with a small smile. We'll call it even. As I walked to my car, I realized that in the span of one evening, I'd lost a brother and possibly gained something else entirely. The night air was crisp and clean, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt truly free. 3 days passed before I could bring myself to answer my phone again. It had been ringing constantly. Reporters who'd somehow gotten hold of the story, distant relatives suddenly concerned about my well-being, and several calls from numbers I didn't recognize. But it was Detective Morrison's call that I finally accepted. Mr. Hayes, I wanted to update you on the situation with your brother. I was sitting in my apartment staring out at the same street view I'd looked at for 10 years, but everything felt different now. The world seemed sharper, more real, as if a fog I hadn't realized was there had finally lifted. How is he? I asked, surprising myself with the question. He's cooperating fully. Signed a confession yesterday and has been providing information about the network. Marcus, the undercover officer, said he's never seen someone so eager to help with an investigation. That sounds like Alan. He always did better when someone else was making the decisions. Detective Morrison was quiet for a moment. Mr. Hayes, can I ask you something? Off the record? Sure. How did you know? To hire a private investigator, I mean. Most people would have just been happy to hear from family after so long. I thought about the question. 10 years ago, when our father died, Alan accused me of manipulating the will. He said I'd somehow convinced a dying man to change his inheritance. The accusation hurt. But what hurt more was realizing that Alan truly believed I was capable of that kind of deception. I paused, watching a woman walk her dog on the sidewalk below. When he called about the lottery money, I heard that same tone in his voice. That same assumption that I was someone who could be manipulated or who would manipulate others. I realized he'd never really known me at all. So you protected yourself. I protected myself, and it turned out I was right to. After hanging up with Detective Morrison, I found myself thinking about Veronica. The recording had captured her voice clearly. Her eager participation in planning what they'd thought would be my death. I wondered if she was sleeping at night, if she felt any remorse, or if she was simply angry that their plan had failed. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Coffee tomorrow? The offer still stands. Sarah. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Yes. Where and when? Her reply came quickly. Cafe Luna downtown. 10 a.m.? The one with the terrible coffee but great conversation. I smiled despite everything. See you there. That night I called my financial advisor and told him I wanted to make some changes to my lottery winnings. Not dramatic changes, but meaningful ones. I'd been sitting on most of the money, unsure what to do with an amount so large it seemed abstract. But Alan's betrayal had clarified something for me. Money without purpose was just numbers on a statement. I want to set up a foundation, I told him. Something to help people in financial crisis find legitimate solutions instead of. I paused, not sure how to finish the sentence. Instead of making desperate choices, he suggested. Exactly. The next morning, I arrived at Cafe Luna 15 minutes early and chose a table by the window where I could watch people pass by on the street. It was a busy area, full of office workers grabbing their morning caffeine and college students with backpacks full of books. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that just a few blocks away, a man was sitting in a jail cell because he'd been willing to kill for money. Sarah arrived exactly on time, wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater that made her eyes look even kinder than they had in the restaurant lighting. She ordered black coffee and a blueberry muffin, while I stuck with just coffee. How are you holding up? She asked once we were settled. Better than I expected, honestly. It's strange, I thought I'd feel more traumatized, but mostly I just feel relieved. Relieved? For 10 years I wondered if I'd done something wrong, if I'd somehow deserved to be cut out of my family's life. Now I know the truth. They weren't cutting me out because of who I was. They were cutting me out because of who they were. Sarah nodded slowly. That must be painful in a different way. It is, but it's also freeing. I spent a decade trying to figure out how to be worthy of their love again. Now I realize their love was never really mine to lose. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city wake up around us. Finally, Sarah spoke again. Can I tell you something? About that night at the restaurant? Of course. I almost didn't say anything. When I saw what your brother was doing, my first instinct was to mind my own business. It's not my job to get involved in customers' personal lives. She took a sip of her coffee and made a face. This really is terrible coffee. But you did get involved. Because I saw your face when you were talking about your family. There was so much hope there, so much genuine love. It reminded me of how I felt when my own family finally started talking to me again after I came out. Your family cut you off too? For 3 years. My parents couldn't accept that I was gay, and my siblings followed their lead. When they finally reached out, I was so desperate to reconnect that I would have done anything they asked. She smiled sadly. Luckily, they'd actually changed. They'd learned and grown and genuinely wanted me back in their lives. But seeing you that night, I realized how easily I could have been manipulated if their motives had been different. So you saved me because you understood. I saved you because everyone deserves to know when someone they love is betraying them, even if the truth is painful. We talked for 2 hours, covering everything from our childhoods to our dreams for the future. Sarah told me about her job at the restaurant, which she was using to put herself through nursing school. She wanted to work in oncology, helping people through the most difficult time of their lives. What about you? She asked. Now that you have all this money, what do you want to do with your life? I told her about the foundation idea, about wanting to help people find legitimate ways out of financial crisis. As I spoke, I saw something light up in her eyes. That's incredible. Do you know how many people get trapped in cycles of debt and desperation because they don't know where to turn for help? You sound like you speak from experience. My parents nearly lost our house when I was in high school. Dad had been laid off, Mom was working 3 part-time jobs, and they were too proud to ask for help. They came so close to making some very bad decisions because they thought they were out of options. What happened? A social worker at my school noticed I was stressed and figured out what was going on. She connected my parents with legitimate resources, job training programs, temporary assistance, financial counseling. It took 2 years, but they got back on their feet. Sarah leaned forward, her excitement evident. That's exactly what your foundation could do. Be that bridge between desperation and hope. As we left the cafe, Sarah surprised me by asking, "Would you like to have dinner sometime? Somewhere that serves better coffee?" I found myself smiling, really smiling, for the first time since this whole ordeal began. I'd like that very much. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Veronica stood at my apartment door looking haggard and years older than when I'd last seen her. Her usually perfect hair was unkempt, her makeup smudged, and her expensive clothes wrinkled. "Philip, we need to talk." I considered not letting her in, but curiosity won. I opened the door wider and gestured toward the living room. "Thank you," she said, settling onto my couch as if her legs could no longer support her weight. "What do you want, Veronica?" "I want to apologize. I want to explain. I want to—" She stopped, covering her face with her hands. "I don't know what I want anymore." "Did Alan send you?" "Alan doesn't even know I'm here. He's not speaking to me right now. He blames me for pushing him into this." "Did you? Push him?" She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she looked up, her eyes red with tears. "I was scared, Philip. We were drowning in debt, and every day brought more bad news. The business was failing, the house was in foreclosure, and I could see Alan falling apart when we heard about your lottery win." She shrugged helplessly. It felt like a lifeline. "So you decided I should die for it?" We convinced ourselves it wouldn't really be murder, that it would look natural, like a medical emergency. We told ourselves you wouldn't suffer, that you wouldn't even know what was happening. She laughed bitterly. "We made up this whole story about how you'd want us to be financially secure, how you'd understand if you knew how desperate we were. But you knew I would never willingly give you that money. Because we'd been horrible to you for 10 years. Because we'd cut you out over $20,000 when you'd probably give us 10 times that now without thinking twice about it. More tears fell. We destroyed our relationship with you over pride and greed, and then we were too ashamed to admit we'd been wrong. I sat down across from her, studying this woman who had once been family. What do you want from me now, Veronica? Forgiveness, I suppose, though I know I don't deserve it. You're right. You don't deserve it. But maybe someday I'll be able to forgive you anyway. Not for your sake, but for mine. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Alan will probably go to prison. That's a consequence of choices he made. Both of you made. I know, I wanted you to know that we never stopped loving you. Even when we were planning to... She couldn't finish the sentence. We loved you, Philip. We were just too broken to love you well. After she left, I sat in my apartment thinking about love and money, about family and betrayal, about the thin line between desperation and evil. Alan and Veronica had loved me in their broken way, but their love had been conditional, based on what I could do for them rather than who I was. For the first time in 10 years, I was beginning to understand the difference. 4 months later, I stood in the lobby of a modest office building downtown, watching as workers installed a simple brass plaque beside the elevator. Hayes Foundation for Financial Recovery, bridging the gap between crisis and hope. Sarah stood beside me wearing the engagement ring I'd given her just 2 weeks earlier, a simple solitaire that caught the morning light streaming through the windows. Are you nervous? She asked, slipping her hand into mine. Terrified, I admitted. But the good kind of terrified. In a few hours, we would officially open the foundation's doors to the public. We'd spent months developing programs, hiring staff, and building partnerships with legitimate financial counselors, job training centers, and social services organizations. The foundation would offer free financial counseling, emergency assistance funds, and most importantly, education about warning signs of financial predators who preyed on desperate people. Your father would be proud, Sarah said softly. I'd been thinking about that a lot lately. My father had been a simple man who worked hard and saved carefully. He'd left me that $20,000 inheritance not because he loved me more than Alan, but because he'd seen something in me that he'd wanted to nurture. Financial responsibility, careful planning, the ability to think beyond immediate gratification. I think he would be, I agreed. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Detective Morrison. Alan sentenced this morning, 18 months, eligible for parole in 9 with good behavior. Thought you'd want to know. I showed the message to Sarah. She read it and squeezed my hand. How do you feel about that? Honestly, relieved. I was worried he'd get a much longer sentence, and despite everything, I didn't want him to spend years in prison. Have you thought about visiting him? I have. I'm not ready yet, but maybe someday. When I can look at him and see my brother instead of the man who tried to kill me. The elevator doors opened and our first appointment stepped out. A young woman about Sarah's age, holding a folder full of papers and looking like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. This was exactly why we'd started the foundation. To help people like her find legitimate solutions before desperation drove them to make dangerous choices. Sarah and I exchanged glances. Ready? She asked. Ready. The first few months of running the foundation taught me more about human nature than I'd learned in 50 years of living. We saw people from all walks of life. Construction workers who'd been injured on the job, single mothers struggling to afford childcare, elderly people on fixed incomes facing unexpected medical bills, young adults drowning in student loan debt. What struck me most was how often people apologized for needing help. They'd come into our office embarrassed, ashamed, convinced that their financial struggles were a moral failing rather than a circumstance that could happen to anyone. The goal isn't to eliminate financial hardship, I explained to our staff during one of our weekly meetings. It's to make sure people know they have options when hardship strikes, that they don't have to choose between their dignity and their survival. Sarah had proven invaluable in running the day-to-day operations. Her nursing background helped her connect with people in crisis, and her natural empathy made clients feel safe sharing their most vulnerable moments. We made a good team, both professionally and personally. Our first major success story came in the form of Marcus Williams, not the undercover officer who'd helped catch Alan, but a 55-year-old mechanic who'd come to us after losing his job and facing foreclosure. Traditional banks wouldn't lend to him due to credit issues, and he'd been approached by what he thought was a private lender offering quick cash. The terms seemed too good to be true, Marcus told us during his intake interview. But I was desperate. I was ready to sign anything. Our financial counselor reviewed the loan documents Marcus had brought with him and immediately identified them as predatory. The interest rates were astronomical, the fees hidden in fine print, and the collateral requirements would have left Marcus worse off than when he started. Instead, we connected Marcus with a legitimate credit union, helped him restructure his existing debts, and provided temporary assistance while he found new employment. 6 months later, he was back on his feet and had even started volunteering at the foundation on weekends. "You saved my life," he told me one Saturday afternoon as we organized donation materials. Not just financially, but literally. I was so desperate I was considering, well, let's just say I was considering options that would have destroyed my family. Stories like Marcus's reminded me why this work mattered. Every person we helped was potentially one less Alan, one less Veronica, one less family destroyed by the toxic combination of desperation and greed. As autumn arrived, Sarah and I began planning our wedding. Nothing elaborate, just a small ceremony with the people who truly mattered to us. Sarah's family embraced me immediately, and I found myself experiencing something I'd thought was lost forever, the warmth of unconditional acceptance. "It's strange," I told Sarah one evening as we addressed wedding invitations. "I spent so many years thinking I was missing out on family, but I think what I was really missing was the right kind of family." "Blood doesn't make family," she replied, sealing another envelope. "Love does, and choice, and showing up for each other when it matters." 2 weeks before our wedding, I received a letter forwarded from my old apartment. Alan had somehow gotten the address wrong. The envelope was thin, just a single sheet of paper in Alan's familiar handwriting. "Phil," it began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand if you throw this away without reading it, but I needed to try to explain, not to excuse what I did, but to help you understand that it was never about you. Prison gives you a lot of time to think, and I've been thinking about the man I became versus the brother I used to be. Somewhere along the way, I started measuring my worth by my bank account instead of my character. Veronica and I fed off each other's fears and insecurities until we convinced ourselves that money was more important than anything else, including your life. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm getting help here. Therapy, financial counseling, job training. I'm learning to be the kind of person who deserves a second chance, even if I never get one. I heard about your foundation from Veronica. She's been following the news coverage, and she told me about all the people you're helping. It doesn't surprise me that you turned your pain into something that helps others. You always were the better brother. I hope you're happy, Phil. I hope you found the family you deserve, because you deserve so much more than the one you were born into. Love, though I know I lost the right to say that. Alan." I read the letter twice, then showed it to Sarah. She read it carefully, then handed it back to me. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think he's learning. Whether he's truly changed or just saying what he thinks you want to hear, I don't know. But he's taking responsibility, which is more than a lot of people do." "Should I write back?" "Not yet. Maybe not ever. That's entirely up to you, and there's no wrong choice." I folded the letter carefully and put it in my desk drawer. Perhaps someday I'd be ready to respond. Or perhaps this one-way communication was enough. Alan expressing his remorse, me reading it, and choosing whether to carry it forward. The night before our wedding, Sarah and I sat on my apartment balcony, looking out over the city lights. Tomorrow we'd be married, and Monday we'd be back at the foundation, helping more people find legitimate paths through financial crisis. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Giving up so much of the lottery money for the foundation?" "Never." I meant it. The foundation had already helped over 200 families, and we were expanding our services to include prevention education in high schools and colleges. Money sitting in a bank account doesn't change lives. Money in motion, money with purpose. That's what makes a difference. Even after everything your family put you through, you're still using your good fortune to help people avoid making the same mistakes they made. Especially because of what they put me through. I know what desperation feels like, and I know how easy it is to convince yourself that there are no legitimate options left. I took her hand, running my thumb over her engagement ring. But there are always options. Sometimes you just need someone to help you see them. The next morning, I woke up in my small apartment for the last time. After the wedding, Sarah and I would move into a modest house we'd bought together. Nothing ostentatious, but comfortable enough to start the family we both wanted. As I got dressed for my wedding, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. 10 years of loneliness followed by a betrayal so profound it could have destroyed my faith in human nature. Instead, it had led me to Sarah, to the foundation, to a life with more meaning than I'd ever imagined possible. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Detective Morrison's number. "Mr. Hayes, congratulations on your wedding day." "Thank you, Detective. I was calling to ask about something. The network that Alan was involved with. How many people were caught?" 14 so far, including 3 suppliers and 11 potential victims who were actually planning to hurt others. Your brother's cooperation was instrumental in shutting down the entire operation. Good, that's really good. Mr. Hayes, if you don't mind me saying so, what your brother tried to do to you was horrific. But the way you've responded, with the foundation, with forgiveness instead of revenge, that's the kind of justice that actually makes the world better. After hanging up, I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. 50 years old, getting married for the first time, starting a new life built on love instead of blood, on choice instead of obligation. At the church, Sarah's father walked her down the aisle, while her mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. My side of the church was filled with friends from the foundation, colleagues from my old job, and neighbors who'd become family over the years. A chosen family, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. As Sarah and I exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever life brought our way, I thought about Alan sitting in his prison cell. I hoped he was getting the help he needed. I hoped he would find a way to build a life worth living when he got out. But mostly, I hoped he would understand that forgiveness wasn't something I could give him. It was something he would have to give himself. The reception was held in the church fellowship hall, decorated with simple flowers and filled with the sound of genuine laughter. As Sarah and I had our first dance, I felt a peace I'd never experienced before. This was what family was supposed to feel like: safe, supportive, unconditionally loving. Later that evening, as we drove away from the reception toward our honeymoon, Sarah took my hand. "Any regrets?" she asked with a smile. I thought about the question seriously. Regrets about my family? About the 10 years of isolation? About the brother who'd tried to kill me for money? "None," I said, and meant every word. Every painful step led me here, to you, to this life. I wouldn't change any of it.